Hello.
How you feeling, brother?
Hi, everyone. Hold on one second. I'll be right back. Hey, what's going on?
How you feeling?
I'm doing great. How are you? Thanks for participating.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Uh, yeah. So, ready
I like
to
your
talk?
background.
Got a message, right?
Yeah, man.
It's all about the message.
All about the message. This is Brian, Brian Verdi, president of New Jersey
Hi, how
ASTA.
are you?
Hey, how you doing? Pleasure. Pleasure.
Good.
SDBR.
Is there snow in New Jersey today?
It's sunny, 40.
Okay.
Pretty good.
Nice.
Snow's still on the ground from the big storm we had. But
Yeah.
where are you located right
I
now?
I was in Brooklyn like a few days ago. And I'm in Norwood, Massachusetts, about 3 hours away. A lot of
Okay.
snow here too.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't that's where you live now, right?
I got a place in Brooklyn. I got a place here. I got a place in Tempe, Arizona.
Nice.
I wish I was in Tempe.
I love Arizona. I go there every year.
Yeah, it's nice. It's
The festival there.
desert. I teach at ASU, so,
Okay.
but it's cool. It's a lot of exodus from California in the neighborhood now.
Very different nature, very different vibe. Yeah.
Oh, it's yeah. Well, the GOP. It's 95% of the people in New York are probably wearing a mask. It's like probably 40% of the people in Tempe are wearing a mask. It's like that.
Well, even as soon as we went skiing in Pennsylvania last week, as soon as you cross the border into even Pennsylvania, you get a lot less
Ooh,
people
that's
wearing masks.
true. It tells you a lot. It
Yeah,
tells you a lot about a place right now.
it's true. It's true. So, um, hey, I love that video of Augustine Heidlich playing Filter.
Man, I can't play it anymore now. He
He
ruined
killed
it.
it.
Ruined it
I know.
for
I've
me.
always heard Rachel do it. It's also
Rachel too, yeah.
for interpretation.
I know, right? I can't. Man, I checked out your Patreon video. That was very cool.
Oh,
I
thanks,
like it.
man. Thank
Very
you.
cool. A lot of you have a lot to say in that thing and very cool, brother.
Thanks, man. I'd be happy to share with you some stuff I've done.
Yeah, please. I saw that Mel Bay book. Plugging in?
Plugging in. Yeah.
Yeah, check that out. Maybe I'll take your firstborn. 100 a month.
Right.
Is that right? Right? Yeah.
I don't know if you want to hang out. I don't know if you want to get with him. Yeah.
How old is? Wait, you have how many
He just
children do you
turned.
have?
I have two. I have two. He just turned 12. He's the older one,
Wow. Yeah.
and
Okay.
the other one's 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Two boys?
No, boy and a girl.
Boy and a girl.
So
Who's
you have
older?
a son. The boy is older.
Both are okay. Yeah, I got an 11-year-old. Yeah, it's gonna be 12 in. Oh my God, you were 12 in June.
Time
He's
flies.
downstairs right now.
Does he play?
Nope. He's anti-music. Well, it's slightly changing. He's a athlete, very talented athlete.
Hmm.
But we did some violin stuff. See, the thing is, he's good with his body. So we just did some basic violin stuff last night, and for the first time, he's like, "Yeah, that was kind of fun." So I'm like, "Oh, okay, okay,
Give it a shot. I mean, it doesn't hurt
yeah,
to know how to play. It doesn't
doesn't
matter.
hurt at all."
Our son wants to be an electrical engineer and a double
Interesting.
major in business, but he's great on the piano. He's won competitions, played Carnegie Hall, but he doesn't want to be a musician.
Yeah,
So that's fine. I'm saying, look, you could always the piano could be your outlet, and you can always make some extra money on the side if you know how to play, no matter what you
right.
do. You know,
I think Nada wants to know if this starts at 2.
it starts at 2. I think we have some early folks.
Cool.
We're just kind of hanging out, sound checking, and making sure that everything works.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
waiting
Okay.
for Eddie and the others to drop in. But for those who are here, welcome. I guess I probably should have waited to admit everybody at 2, but whatever. We're just hanging out. So, um, all right. We're supposed to get at least 50 people here, which is great.
Is this the ASTA conference? Is that right?
This is uh, sponsored by the New Jersey chapter of ASTA,
Very cool.
and it's national. It's open to anybody who's it's a series of symposiums that they have. So this is the second one I've done, but they've had other ones. But people just talk about a topic and share resources and stuff like that. You know.
Very cool.
The conference is in March. The national conference is in March.
Okay, very cool.
If you ever get a chance, you should hang out you should come to the national.
I've never done ASTA. I'm gonna do it. I might do it this year. Just hang out, and then I'm sure it'll be back next year.
This year's all virtual.
Yeah. I was thinking of now a good year to jump in, check it out. I've heard a lot about it. I've been invited, but I don't know.
It's a great community, and they should know you. They should know your work. I mean,
yeah,
work's already pretty well known. So
no doubt. It's usually just a timing thing, but right. I want to carve out time. So yeah, I think I'm going to do it next month. Out.
With the pandemic, we're offering a lot of things for free. Like,
awesome.
This time around, our PayPal button didn't work online for non-members. So I'm like, whatever. Everyone, it's free. We have to give a lot of free things this year because a lot of musicians are just out of work, and a lot of it's impacting our schools. So we want to be as supportive as we can with the community. We also want to support them teaching online virtually for string teachers because that's just a new thing that was thrown at us. And now I think this is an appropriate discussion to be having. My research, what I do, I really do think that we continue to think that that strings are an elitist type of thing. Only people with money do, and it tends to be white, European centric, and we have to break out of that. And if we don't, as string players and string teachers, we're going to have an issue in the coming years of people playing string instruments. So we definitely have to diversify what we do and the styles we do and the composers to make it relevant. So
love it. Yeah, no, I'm totally supportive. We had similar struggles at APAP. I'm on the board for APAP, and we essentially did a 150 conference, but also it was basically pay what you can, if at all. So there were we put up 4 buttons, one of which is if you can't afford to pay anything, that's fine. So, but surprisingly, we had I'd say we had 72% people sign up at the 150 level. And some actually gave a little more. Some paid for others, which was also nice. So very surprised by that.
And also, we want people to become members, and we can't ask for that. I don't think at this time, for people to pay if they can't. Also, just because our PayPal button is broken.
Yeah, I understand. It's an omen.
That PayPal button working.
That's something. That's telling you something. It's cosmic.
Yeah, exactly. Right. The gods are protecting you, protecting your members.
So I'm texting Rachel and Eddie, just letting them know we're here.
Yeah, cool.
Anything well, you know what? I'm going to read everyone's bios.
Okay.
I'll kind of talk you through what's going to happen. This is what we did last time. So Brian has some announcements and introductions he's going to make. I got to talk about AstaCap. I'm going to read all your bios and introduce you guys.
Check one.
Then I have some specific questions, some for everybody and some specifically for each of you. And then you could all, in that course of time, you could feature some videos and you want to introduce, or we can do that afterwards. And then we're going to open the floor for questions. And it just kind of flows from there.
Cool. Do you want me to test anything now? I got some things up. So now's the time.
If you want to share your screen, try it out.
Yep. Okay, let's just make sure. Oh, don't need to see that. My email from you, Joe. Just kidding.
All right.
Joe, do you need me to introduce you? I swear I won't butcher your bio this time.
Yeah, if you don't mind, that's fine. In case people don't.
All right. Did you send that over again, your bio?
So are you hearing this? You seeing it? Okay.
Yeah. You might want to make it full screen.
Yeah. I didn't want to be rude. Let me just go to a part that you can actually.
Or you know what?
It's okay.
That's badass. I was watching that yesterday. It's amazing.
Thanks, man.
Great.
Okay, cool. So that works. Yeah, you can see that, right? You can see that. Okay,
Sure.
cool.
All right.
Okay.
I have those. You
Little
have
ones.
them. So either
You
way.
have 'em. Then if it comes up, I can play live. I think you said you wanted maybe that too.
It's totally
right.
optional. If you
That's
feel
right.
so inclined, I
Okay.
it's
Okay.
whatever you want.
Cool.
Um,
I'll just check that real quick. Can you hear that? Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
I
Yeah.
love the Eric Casado violins. One of these days, I got to get
I
one
love them, man. Yeah, I gotta.
straight up.
It's okay.
Yeah, it sounds perfect.
Cool.
Is everyone else okay with that?
Sounds good.
Cool.
Brian,
Yeah.
you were
just playing-
starting to. Brian,
Oh,
you were
sorry.
starting to say something. I'm sorry.
I was just saying, I could just say your professor violin at New Jersey City University. Would that be okay, or do you want me to go through the bio? I'm okay with saying your bio. I just have to read it before.
Um, yeah, it's okay. I mean, I'll re-forward it to you, but whatever you want to do is fine.
Yeah, I do want to give you the credit for putting this together and everything else. Hey,
Let me find.
nothing wrong with the plug, right?
Yeah.
Actually, you really deserve it, though. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Let me see if I. Here it is. Okay. All right. Just sent.
Okay.
Um,
I got it.
so DBR. If should I call you DBR or Daniel? What do you prefer?
Whatever you like.
Or Dan? No,
Whatever you like.
if you want to talk about the work you've done with school orchestras and with with education,
Mm-hmm.
because I think a lot of the audience is going to be orchestra teachers looking for repertoire.
Yeah.
And because the solo stuff is great, and Rachel sent a lot of solo stuff. And I had a good conversation with Rachel last night about arranging solo pieces for orchestra, like expanding
Yeah.
and all kinds of things like that. So
Pleasure. Yeah. Happy to. Happy to. Yeah. Yeah. I've been doing stuff online actually, with different orchestras, youth orchestras, a lot of ensembles, a lot of string quartets. You know,
okay.
they picked up on the Rosa Parks Quartet and the King Quartet and all that stuff. So, yeah, I can't remember where they're from. Sorry, forgive me. Denison University. I think that's Granville, Ohio.
Yeah,
That was yesterday. Yeah.
cool. I'm from Cleveland, and I have friends that live.
Oh, so yeah, that's a cool place. Denison. Do you know Denison University?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I had a frat party band in college.
I could see that. Not much to do in that town, so
Right.
yeah,
So probably,
exactly. Do well there. You would do very well there.
yeah.
Yeah, that was that was my last like kind of live performance. Sybarite 5 was out there. Oh, and Ethel.
Yeah.
It was like March 8th of last year. Yep, and we ended up in a bar.
That's great that they book a lot of different kinds of ensembles like that they're welcoming to.
Yeah, they were very well. The guy doing it is Chewy. What's his name? I can't remember his actual. We call him Chewy. He was a composer at U of M.
Mhm.
So he's got money from the president, brings us different groups in each year. But this happened to be Sybarite 5 and Ethel String Quartet. Which is so funny, right?
Um, yeah, I've worked. I play the Grand Canyon Music Festival every year, and Ethel was a big part of that for 10 years. They do this Native American Composers Apprentice program,
Oh,
and then
really?
my group, Sweet Plantain, did it, where you go out to the reservation. They have a composer in residence teach kids how to write string quartets, Navajo, Hopi, it's Havasupai, and then it
Wow.
culminates in a big concert, and they get a string quartet to fly out there. It's an
Oh,
NEA
wow.
program. So Ethel did it. Catalyst Quartet did it. My group, Sweet Plantain, did it for 2 years.
That's deep, man.
And you workshop what the kids wrote, and it's an interesting mix of like native influences, reggae and metal. That's what they're into. They live out there in the desert in Utah, and
Oh, wow. That's deep.
I think Ethel was like spearheaded that whole thing. They were the first.
Yeah.
They did it for 10 years.
Yeah, that's deep. I'm trying to think. I feel like there was a Sweet Plantain. This was years ago. Did Earl sub with the group?
He did.
Did you guys do something at North Carolina State University, Raleigh, North Carolina, the Stewart Theater?
Yep. And Earl was talking about how you guys played there.
Okay, yes. It can't, I was gosh, 2 weeks ago. They no 2 weeks ago. Christmas time, they did this big online concert. It keeps coming up. It's so funny. Regina Carter tuned in. A bunch of people tuned in,
Mhm.
and it came up that you guys have. I guess you've done it a few times actually. That theater.
I was there with them once, but I think they might have done it
I think they've
before I
done it.
joined the group.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. So it came up, and then Earl came up, you came up, a bunch of people came up. Oh, I wish I can remember the. It was a cellist. She's amazing. She wonderful cellist, but also sings. It was a cool concert, man. And yeah, Sweet Plantain came up because they have a really good like string tradition out there.
Yeah, yeah, and they have
Hmm.
and it's a good area, and they have some good teachers, and electric violin shops not far from there.
That's what it is. Of course, that's what. Yes, Blaze. Remember Blaze?
Yeah,
This is
I
so.
interviewed him in my book. My last chapter was interviewing Blaze.
Ah, the Godfather. He's the Godfather, man.
You know Matt Bell.
I know Matt Bell. Yeah, he's taking it over, right? Him and
Yeah,
a
well,
few
not
others.
he's their social media guy, but he doesn't manage the shop.
Okay.
He does a lot of.
Okay. I gotta get in touch with those guys. Actually, I need some
Mm.
stuff done.
We're 5 minutes out. I'm resending the link to Rachel and others. We're not here. Um, okay, I'm gonna admitting all the people. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm looking for the Zoom link. Um, okay.
You say you're looking for the link, Joe?
I found it. I'm just copying it into. I'm sending them a text because they
Cool.
should be here. Okay. Here's Rachel. All right. Rachel's here.
Rachel, is that real? That looks real. Wow.
I
I
think
want
it is
Rachel's
real.
life. Joe, I want Rachel's life.
Good to be the Rachel.
Wow. Rachel, is that real? That looks real. I think you're muted. You can tell a lot about a person's background.
My husband's out of town, so my 9-year-old just set up my cameras and mics, and she managed to do it.
She did a great job. That looks real. Is that like real?
Yeah, it's just my living room. You should see the other side of the room. It's all cameras and lights. And
All right. I want your life, Rachel. It almost looks like a virtual background. That's what's so crazy.
well, then my bookshelves would be a little neater.
It's all good.
That's a real Kenyan fiddle back there.
Wow, that's deep. Is that a real fire?
Yep.
Oh my God, that is so cool.
It's
love
super
fire.
cold here in Chicago today.
Yeah. What's the temperature in Chicago?
Let me give you an accurate answer. 14 degrees.
Whew.
Yes, keeps you honest.
Oh my God.
That wind off of the lake, right?
Yeah.
Actually, it's called the Windy City because about 100 years ago, we had a reputation for long-winded politicians.
I did not know that.
believe it.
There's also a really bad
believe
joke.
it.
There's a really bad joke, but I don't want to offend anyone here who might be from Iowa or Indiana, so I won't say it. I'll tell you later in private why Chicago is called the Windy City. So anyway, all right, let's see.
Unfortunately, my daughter doesn't know how to like move the camera closer up. I feel like
okay.
I'm farther away than everybody, but
It's a good shot.
What are you gonna do?
She did a great job. I love her videos, by the way.
Your daughter is amazing.
She is like next level.
Oh, her little improvs that she's been doing.
Oh, incredible. Just her knowledge. I'm like learning from her. I'm like, ooh, okay.
The song about raindrops was stunning. I thought it was an old, when I heard it, I thought it was like an old Bessie Smith or Billie Holiday song. I didn't know it was her song, that.
Well, it wasn't really a song. She was just making it up.
Right. But it sounded like an old like blues lament from the 20s or 30s.
Cool.
So beautiful.
Hey, Joe, I can get started as people are coming in. I could make our announcements.
Yeah, we're still waiting on Eddie, but we can get going. I just resent the link. Meanwhile, I'm admitting people.
I'll give it a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Okay. People are filing in, so I'm letting everyone in here. Here's Eddie. All right. Cool. Eddie Venegas, what's up? You got to unmute if you need to speak. Okay.
Wow, we have 45 participants. This is good.
That's great. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I'll just begin. I just want to welcome everybody. I'm Brian Verdi. I'm the ASTA New Jersey president. And so this panel is being sponsored by New Jersey ASTA. So I just want to give a couple of chapter announcements. Well, just one actually. It's the ASTA CAP. So if you're not aware of what ASTA CAP is, it's the Certificate Advanced Program for Strings. And we offer, as a national level, we offer 11 levels of graded curriculum and periodic performance examinations from elementary through the standard concerto repertoire for violin, viola, cello, and bass. Completion of these levels is recognized through the awarding of ASTA Certificate of Achievement, accompanied by an examiner's comments. We have a number of well-known commentators. These examinations are not competitive. This is not a competitive program. They are meant to enhance and reinforce efforts of the average students and motivating them to perceive and even excel in their instrumental studies. The program is fully compatible with both traditional and Suzuki methods. So some of the benefits of this program, if you're not aware of, please visit our website at astanj.com or the ASTA National website, which is at astastrings.org. And you can find out more information about the ASTA CAP. The registration applications are online this year. And so the next application will be open up in June, so keep your eye out for that. So some of the benefits for teachers includes a flexible curriculum. Any teaching tradition is welcome. And this is a non-competitive performance experience. So again, I want to thank all of you for attending, and we have people from across the nation. I did my best trying to promote this across the nation. I think this is fitting for the time, and I just want to now introduce Joe Denzen. He will be our host for this panel.
Yes.
And just a little bit of background information about Joe. Joe was born in St. Petersburg, Russia. Joe has been called the Jimi Hendrix of the electric violin because of his innovation, style, and his acoustic and 7-string Viper electric violin. He holds a Bachelor's of Music from Indiana University and Master's of Manhattan School of Music. Joe is the frontman for the award-winning progressive rock band Stratospheris and a member of the Latin jazz string quartet Sweet Plantain. He has worked with Bruce Springsteen, Sheryl Crow, New York City Ballet, Jazz at Lincoln Center, The Who, 50 Cent, and Renaissance. Joe has written a concerto for electric violin and orchestra, as well as solo pieces commissioned by violinist Rachel Barton Pine. Mel Bay published his acclaimed book, Plugged In, A Guide to Gear and New Techniques for 21st Century String Players. A passionate educator numerous times at ASTA National Conference and has taught at Mark Wood Rock Orchestra Camp, Strings Without Boundaries, and Mark O'Connor's String Camp and Fiddle Hell. He's also a professor at New Jersey City University. Thank you, Joe.
All right, welcome everybody, and thank you, Brian. And I also want to thank Jody Rajesh and Tim Schwartz for helping put these symposiums together, for all their hard work. Jody had asked me to talk about AstaCap, but I think Brian pretty much covered it, unless there's something that I need to include.
I just might want to add one quick thing. That the feedback is really, really great. It's really in-depth and lengthy. That's one of the advantages of AstaCap. It's not just that they check off some boxes and award the certificate, but you get up to sometimes 2 pages of feedback from really dedicated adjudicators. And that can be really helpful to the student and the teacher. So that's kind of one of the hallmarks I just wanted to emphasize. So thanks.
Great. So I want to thank our panelists, Daniel Bernard Roumain, Rachel Barton Pine, and Eddie Venegas. And first thing I'm going to do is introduce everybody. I'm going to embarrass them by reading their bios. And then I have some questions I put together for the participants. We're going to share some ideas and share some music. This is a very important topic, especially for the times we live in, how to find new repertoire for your students and play music by African-American and Latin composers. So we have a lot of information to share, and I'm going to dive right in. So first of all, we have my good friend Eddie Venegas. Eddie's a New York-based Venezuelan violinist, trombonist, and composer. He performs regularly with a variety of Latin jazz, classical, and popular music ensembles. Born and raised in Caracas, Venezuela, he began violin as a child, moved to New York City to study with Daniel Phillips of the Orion String Quartet. He obtained his bachelor's and master's from Queens College. Eddie's a founding member of Sweet Plantain Quartet, whose diverse genre blurring repertoire features his original compositions and arrangements of Latin American composers. They performed internationally, all over Russia, Sweden, the Mediterranean, all over the United States. He's also toured for many years with Grammy Award winner Mark Anthony, doubling on trombone and violin. He's a founding member of Los Acheros, proud members of the legendary charanga band Orchestra Broadway. His extensive background in Latin music has included performances with Pedrito Martinez, Don Omar, Sonia de los Santos, and many other artists. He also performs on Broadway in shows like Ain't Too Proud in Miss Saigon. He's played with the Hudson Jazz Ensemble, John Faddis, Joe Zawinul, Victor Jones, and he's directed a string music program for St. Ignatius Middle School in the Bronx. He's also done film scores for movies like Unafraid, documentary Voices from the Crime Victims Treatment Center with his wife and collaborator, Karen Venegas. All right, welcome, Eddie. Daniel Bernard Roumain, otherwise known as DBR, known for his signature violin sounds infused with myriad electronic, urban, and African-American influences. DBR takes his genre-bending music beyond the proscenium. Composer of chamber, orchestral, and operatic works, he's won an Emmy for outstanding musical composition for his collaborations with ESPN and created large-scale site-specific musical events for public spaces. He earned his doctorate in music composition from University of Michigan and is currently professor of practice at Arizona State University. An avid arts industry leader, DBR serves on the board of the League of American Orchestras, Association of Performing Arts Presenters, and Creative Capital, the advisory committee of the Sphinx organization. And he was co-chair of the 2015 and 2016 APAP conferences. Rachel Barton Pine is a concert violinist with an active performing career since age 7. Ms. Barton has appeared as soloist with many of the world's most prestigious ensembles, including the Chicago, Atlanta, St. Louis, Dallas, Baltimore, Montreal, Vienna, New Zealand, Iceland, and Budapest symphonies, as well as the Buffalo Philharmonic, Louisville, Belgian National Orchestra. I can go on and on and on. She has worked closely with renowned conductors like Zubin Mehta, Eric Leinsdorf, Nimi Yarvi, Simon Bichkov, and Placido Domingo. Acclaimed collaborations include appearances with Pacifica String Quartet and additional pairings with Daniel Barenboim, Christopher Eschenbach, Jonathan Guild, and Mark O'Connor. As a recitalist, she has performed complete Paganini caprices and Bach sonatas and partitas for live broadcast on WFMT radio in Chicago and NPR radio. And she performed, she did an amazing thing. She performed all the Paganini caprices 2 weeks after she gave birth in a recital, which kind of blew my mind. And she's collaborated with a lot of composers like Earl Manian, Daniel Bernard Roumain, myself, John Corigliano, and numerous other composers. So welcome, Daniel and Rachel and Eddie. And I've prepared a list of questions. Some are directed at everybody in the panel, some directed at specific people. We're also gonna share some music. And Rachel's gonna talk about an incredible website she helped create called musicbyblackcomposers.org, right? It's a foundation. So we're gonna get into that, and then we're gonna leave some time for questions. So without further ado, so this is a general question for everybody, and I'll just call on people one at a time. Talk about your background. What inspired you to take a left turn and explore non-classical genres? And I'm gonna start with Daniel, or DBR.
Hey, great to be here. Great to see everyone. Thank you so much, Joe. I'm going to try to keep my answers to a minute or less. Good to see you, Diana, Jennifer, Elizabeth, Nada, Catherine, Kate, Timothy, John, Schwartz, Larissa. It's good to see you, Catherine. It's good to see you, Rudy. And where did I see that? Oh, yes, Elizabeth. I love the blue and the violins and mandolins and instruments hanging in your room. Metronome. I love that tick-tock metronome. Okay, so question was, why did I, sorry, what was the question again? Sorry, Joe.
Okay. So I guess, well, the first, talk about your background and what inspired you to kind of veer away from strictly sticking to a traditional classical repertoire.
Oh, okay.
Your curiosity. So to speak.
Sure. Well, I identify as a Black Haitian American composer. My pronouns are he and him. I'm in Norwood, Massachusetts right now, the indigenous land of the Pagano people and the Massachusetts tribe. Both my parents were born in Haiti. I'm a Black Haitian American composer, and I farm and frame ideas. I started playing the violin when I was 5 years old. First piece I ever played publicly was Hatikva. I was precocious, like most 5-year-olds. I was lucky to have a teacher that had a broad embrace of a broad practice. And I say this with love and affection to everyone here. I'm also subject to and recovering from the trauma of racism within our field and the scaffolding of practice, which is unfair and unnecessary. We see the violin. I was taught to play the violin kind of in one way, which didn't speak to the many ways that the violin has always been played. I think that racism and the notion of a hierarchical approach to the instrument is one of the reasons I broke free from that. I was never going to be able to play Bach as well as Rachel Barton Pine or the people that were all around me at Vanderbilt University and the University of Michigan. And I started saying to myself, as a black person, can I participate in the world of playing the violin, in the world of violin playing? So I had to find a way, thinking about Stuff Smith and Butch Morris and a lot of other, and quite frankly, Prince and Jimi Hendrix. And I think that I started kind of, we would call it extended practice as a composer. I just say I started inventing a way of playing the violin that reflected my race, that reflected my culture, and that actually was a reflection of the way most musicians in the world make music. But I'll leave it there.
Cool. Before I go on, I got to remember to do this. There's a wonderful Google Doc of resources that's being compiled that was also has contributions by the previous group of panels from our last symposium, January 23rd. So I'm going to share the link in the chat, and there's lists and links from this topic, today's topic, and there's going to be a lot more added to it. So here is the link to the Google Doc, and I'm going to move on to Eddie with the same question. Talk about your background and what inspired you to take a left turn and explore non-classical genres.
Hi, how's everybody? I just go straight to the answer. I came to the United States to, I finished high school in Caracas, Venezuela. I came to, can you hear me? You can hear me, right? Okay. I came to the United States to study violin, to study classical violin with Margaret Pardee at Queen's College. Doing all the classical music. I fell in love with classical violin, all the big concertos, Bach, all that stuff. And at the same time, I grew up, in salsa and Latin music from a Latin American country. Then I started playing non-classical music when I came to New York City, and I was at school. And it was basically a necessity. There was a band that needed a violinist, and somebody loaned me a pick of for the violin, and then I started playing with this salsa band, and that's where it started. And I had to do it because I needed the money, and then I realized, it's my language, and I always liked improvisation, but I never thought it was something that was going to be part of me until I was able to be part of that stuff. And then from then on, I continued to play there, and then study, get more serious about improvisation, mainly jazz, because jazz sort of gives you all the tools to tackle a lot of other music that you use improvisation with. And then I fell in love with the trombone. At the time, somebody just loaned me a trombone at school, and I started playing it, and I loved it. So then after 1 or 2 years playing the horn, then I realized, oh boy, I'm in trouble. I'm gonna play these two things, and we'll see. And then I pursue my classical in addition to my different things on non-classical music. And later, when I started my master's, I started a quartet with a group of friends where I would actually write music from all those experiences on Latin music, and the studies that I finished at school that were very rigorous. So you learn a lot of counterpoint and stuff at Queen's College. So it was a great opportunity to put all that stuff together into.
Are you kidding me?
While Joe is logging back on. So, hi, I'm
I'm
Rachel
glad the
Barton
whole meeting
Pine.
didn't crash.
There he is. There he is.
Sorry, man. Okay.
I'm Rachel Barton Pine, and before I talk about non-classical, I want to actually talk about classical because, I came up with the typical path, the neighborhood Suzuki teacher when I was 3, and then on to the more advanced programs that we had to drive an hour each way off into the suburbs, and that kind of made for a stressful childhood. So at age 8, when I was in the 3rd grade, my school principal made the radical suggestion that I discontinue going to school. And no, I did not get expelled, but the principal suggested that I start homeschooling, which in the 1980s was remarkable because homeschooling was neither as socially acceptable nor as widespread as it is these days. But it really saved my childhood. It made it more normal, ironically, because I could do the academic work in just a couple of hours a day. And especially since we spread it out over 12 months a year, 7 days a week, no one day ever took more than 2 or 3 hours of schoolwork, including homework. Well, there was no homework because it was just all homeschooling. And then I could practice during school hours and hang out with my friends in the afternoon. Anyway, we did this, entirely for expediency so that I could go to all these evening rehearsals and have this whole musical life. But as we became more and more comfortable with the concept of homeschooling, we fell into the paradigm of unschooling, which really has I describe it as having 2 main pillars. One is learner-directed interests, and the other is binge learning. So if I'm curious about something, it might not be on the curriculum, but I can just go and find some materials about it. In those days, that meant going physically to the library. And I could stick on that topic until I was satiated. I didn't have to stop after a week and move on to the next unit. And so that way of learning started spilling over into my music. And so I would get composers' biographies. I would get vinyl records of others of the composer's works whose violin piece I was learning. And then eventually, when I was a teenager, I started learning about historically informed performance practice with Baroque music and before, Renaissance, medieval, learning about how to play those instruments, learning about how to improvise in those styles and use the gut strings and the whole 9 yards. So all these years I was perhaps more creatively driven with my music thanks to this freedom and flexibility of schedule that I had than many of my classmates. But it simply never occurred to me to do anything that was completely non-classical on my instrument. I'd been listening to non-classical music since about age 10 when Santa Claus brought me a transistor radio for Christmas. And I started scrolling up and down the dials, seeing what was out there in the universe, and particularly fell in love with heavy metal. But yeah, it wasn't until I was 20 I was invited to give a performance of the national anthem before a Chicago Bulls playoff game. This is in the Michael Jordan era, so I got to meet Michael and Scotty and all the guys and play in this 25,000 seat stadium. But the really cool thing is millions of people saw the performance on television, and I started getting total strangers coming up to me in the street going, "Hey, I saw you on the Bulls, and that violin is so cool, I didn't realize." And so that inspired me to find different ways to bring the violin to people than what I had been doing with just, wherever the orchestras sent me for community engagement. So I started going on rock radio stations, and I would play a little bit of, some Led Zeppelin riffs or some Metallica riffs or whatever, depending on the format of the station. And then I would follow that up with some Paganini and some Izai and invite people to the Symphony show the next night. And it started really working. I get a lot of people coming to their first ever orchestra concert and loving it. And of course, that was the first time I had ever played any of that stuff on the violin. And one thing led to another. Actually, that Bulls game was so pivotal because Mark O'Connor is a basketball fan and happened to see my Bulls performance. And then he invited me to join the faculty of his fiddle camp back in the late 90s as classical instructor. But then I got to meet so many colleagues in all of these non-classical genres that I had no exposure to up to that point in my life. Everything: jazz violin, rock violin, klezmer, Celtic fiddling, Appalachian, Texas swing, and you name it. It was just amazing. And I started to get to know some of this other stuff, which being able to have a better understanding of traditional music of various kinds really does positively impact your classical playing because so much classical music is inspired by various non-classical styles. I've gone deep with Scottish specifically to the point where I actually could be considered to be a legit Scottish fiddler. And of course, I had my own metal band for a number of years with a 6-string electric at one point. But yeah, but anyway, when it comes to classical repertoire, this idea of exploration has never left. And so, in addition to other kinds of classical music, also the repertoire within the standard, classical period, romantic period, etc. I've always looked for, overlooked, neglected, forgotten gems, stuff that's absolutely top rate, but hasn't received the attention that maybe it deserved. And everything from like the concerto by Beethoven's Dedicatee, Franz Clement, or the under-recognized original violin works of Franz Liszt. But this also extended to diverse composers. Growing up in Chicago with the Center for Black Music Research and the Chicago Sinfonietta and resources here in town, I was lucky enough to, from a young age, be exposed to the works of Black composers and really fall in love with a lot of them. And honestly, at those ages was, too naive to recognize, the social justice element. I just loved the music, which I guess is, the most pure motivation of all in a way. And so I started playing this music and championing it, and that led to joining the Sphinx Board and being invited to serve on diversity panels, and for which I was initially very underqualified, but learned so much. And through listening to the needs of the community, I ultimately used my not-for-profit foundation, the RBP Foundation, that I had founded for the purposes of young artist support, as a reflection of the economic circumstances of my own childhood, a financial assistance program for young artists for things that scholarships don't cover, like sheet music purchase, bow rehairs, piano accompanist fees, and also an instrument loan program. So I had a 501c3 here in my early 20s, and this Black composer conundrum where people were asking me, where do I get this, where do I get that, and all the work in the academic realm just wasn't filtering out into the general public, particularly the knowledge about things like, Frederick Douglass played the violin, Coretta Scott King had a college degree in violin. There were all Black orchestras in the 1800s, like the equivalent of the Negro baseball leagues, and so many composers' works that had either never been published and were in manuscript only, or had long since been out of print due to systemic racism. And so I ultimately started this project, and we collected more than 900 works by more than 350 composers in our first 15 years, and then published our first pedagogical volume. And then since then, we've expanded our activities to lots and lots more resources, and have many more projects in the pipeline. And I know we'll get to talking about all of that, but that's just really how it happened. I never expected to do that, but it perfectly fit my personality, because I am a total music history and research geek. I love exploring a wide range of repertoire, not just the popular favorites, but all the good music I can get my hands on. And I'm very dedicated to the cause of music education, and thanks to my church, social justice as well. So it's awesome to have a project that really checks all these boxes at the same time, and is super fun to do and does good for the world while I'm at it.
We'll talk more about your foundation. We're going to jump around, but I wanted to ask DBR a question next. Where was it here? Here we go. Why do you think, I could ask everyone this question, but I think I'm going to focus on each person. Why do you think it's important to introduce diverse repertoire to young musicians? The $1 million question.
Because I think young, well, I have to define young. Let's say, I don't know, younger than 10.
Well, I think, there's a lot of teachers here who probably teach orchestra from K to 12, and college level. So I guess young could be, anything.
Yeah. I think
we're also young too, so it's also.
Well, I'm 50 years old, so I want to say that honestly. But yes, Eddie, you're young.
Boy.
Yeah, I think that it's part of. I think repertoire reflects who you are. It reflects your choices. It reflects, I always say you want to know the soul of a university. Look to its curriculum. You want to know the soul of an orchestra. Look to its programming. So as I'm looking at this wonderful audience. I know everyone here cares. I see racism as malice and malady, and it's important that I lead with this notion of one of the ways that we can be aware and relevant and responsible is to not talk about these things in a vacuum, but to continue to connect them to what's happening historically and now. And what's happening now is probably 5 crises. There's a pandemic. There's a fight for social justice. There's huge changes in our climate. There's huge changes in our judicial system on a federal level. There's huge changes happening economically. So the reason you want to think about a diverse and embrace repertoire that embraces the breadth of imagination and music making is that it's going to help young people, all of us, as we navigate through. I just identified 5 crises. There's probably more. So I think that's actually really important. I think the other reason is, think of it this way. If someone came into your studio and didn't have a left arm, but said, I want to play the violin, you would probably find a way. It would be so immediate, their disability, right? Picture in your mind a 7-year-old child who's missing a part of their body, but they want to play the instrument. You would move heaven and earth for them to play an instrument. And oftentimes what happens, a black child or a brown child or a BIPOC child comes before you, nothing changes really in the repertoire. And I'm guilty of this myself. I don't have that same immediacy to say, tell me about yourself. I see you, but tell me something about yourself. What are your interests? What is the music you really want to play? Chance the Rapper. Okay, let's start there, right? And I think the other thing is why a broad, diverse, welcoming repertoire well beyond the canon is so important is that it can actually speak to equity. It can actually speak to being seen and heard. I don't use the word teacher or student in my teaching. I teach at Arizona State University proudly. I teach at Dartmouth College proudly. A few other places proudly. I use the word contributor. That we're all contributing to a world, a classroom of ideas and possibility. It's an equal exchange, right? So that's what's so exciting to me. There are ways to play the violin that have not been discovered yet. And I think we have to be very careful in our choices. And I don't want to say too much because I'm more excited to hear from my esteemed colleagues and from each of you. But I know that if I were to go, I serve on the board for the League of American Orchestras. And the last orchestra I soloed with was the Baltimore Symphony with the great Marin Oslop conducting, Voodoo Violin Concerto, as a matter of fact. And there was a moment where I did a call and response with the orchestra. I would play something and they would respond. So they're improvising. And there were some members of the orchestra who made it a point to tell me they weren't comfortable with that. And I'll leave it there, Joe, that as we think about the breadth of, in some cases, American-made, American ingenuity in music making, well beyond jazz, improvisation, and hip-hop, by the way, but those are good places to start. We're not participating in the broader world of ideas for the violin. I'll say this. I was taught 2 pizzicatos. Pizzicato, fleshy part of the finger, you get it, and then the Bartok pizz, okay? I had to develop the 15 other pizzicatos that I do, right? So I think that we have to approach this from a way that we are missing out when we limit the canon even to our own experience and don't rightfully say, if you've been playing the violin for 5 minutes, you are doing something that I have forgotten, that I could embrace, and that those sounds you're making are not only valid, but they reflect who you are. Let's find a way to continue to explore who we are together, not maybe me as your teacher, but us together in an equal exchange of potent, powerful, necessary ideas towards equity.
Thank you. There's a lot I could say about extended techniques, something I've been talking about for a long time, and being able to play different pizzicatos, imitating a guitar, or doing, something that's funkier, that works well with hip hop. That's just one of many examples of techniques that are outside the realm of how you would play a Bartok pizz or a Chaik 4 pizz, So there's a lot of things like that. Moving on to Eddie, being from Venezuela is kind of inevitable that we should mention El Sistema. And I know you're not a product of it, but there's might be some teachers here that have incorporated it into their curriculum. And I know there's It has a presence in the United States. Um, can you talk a little bit about El Sistema for those not familiar with it, and what you know about it?
Yeah, I was actually part of El Sistema for a few years.
I
It's
didn't
just
know
that, El Sistema is probably the biggest, used to be the biggest movement of music education in Venezuela, but there were other schools as well. And it became much bigger, the past 10 years, until the government decided to cut it off at the minute Dudamel criticized the government. but the El Sistema is nothing but a huge music program. Imagine if you had a ton of resources, a ton of money, where you could take and build schools everywhere in the country, and you send all these teachers to teach, and you have contracts with companies where you're provided with all these instruments and all this stuff, and then you just start doing that stuff for many years. That's what the Sistema was. There was no formula where you teach and you have a trick where the kids are over a sudden, after a few years they're playing Tchaikovsky, overture, 1812. That's it. It's just teaching music and having the support of the government, and if you, and then they had the guy that created it was very smart, very smart. Like he would be he's one of those guys that would read a page of a book and then give it to you, and then he'll recite it back to you. Photographic memory, his dream was to create a massive movement of young kids playing classical music in Venezuela.
Do they also play Venezuelan music?
No, actually, they because classical music was already an innovation, and that's where the point I'm trying to make. So you have this massive movement, not necessarily embracing Venezuelan music, but it's just embracing music as a way to enrich your life. And for people, that's exactly what it was. Over a sudden, you live in a town where you don't have shoes. Your kids don't even have shoes or have holes in their shoes, but they do have a violin, and they go to a program, and they spend 3-4 hours in a program rehearsing for the local orchestra. For a parent, that's like a gift. And for the kids, it's the world, basically. Sometimes they even have ways to give them money. And we're talking about Venezuela, Saudi Venezuela, during the years when Venezuela had a ton of revenue from oil. And he was very smart to get the budget to develop this program. It looked good for the politicians, it looked good for everyone, and it was great for the kids. In the United States, you don't have that. And that's the point I'm trying to make, because sometimes I'm teaching, even with the string plantet, we've been to places where we go, oh, look, it's not just about classical music and all this established stuff. We could also do the music we're related to. And then you go to a school and you realize, no, these kids have no music instruction whatsoever. And you need to, and so at that point, any kind of music, Bach, Eddie Venegas, anybody, it's an innovation in itself, because there's the lack of music education. And I remember, I don't know if you probably remember when we went to Reading, Pennsylvania, which we had a residency in Reading, Pennsylvania with our string quartet, and this is a very red town, and for some reason they had a music program in every public school going on as a policy, and they had the most amazing program, and then we were able to teach these kids, and because they already had that foundation, we were able to introduce all these different elements of our music, the Latin music, and which happened to be it was predominantly Latino and Black, so they definitely related to the Latin music. But the music program needed to be there. So I just want to make clear, Sistema is great because they had a great foundation of music instruction. And then, you know, then later in the years, they started to introduce Venezuelan music elements. They kind of realized, okay, so that's definitely is something that's useful, and you know,
and it's their
add it to
heritage,
the repertoire.
it's their culture, it's their heritage.
It's their heritage. But it's funny, like for many years, classical music was such an innovation. It was such a new thing that, you know, they didn't even want to play Venezuelan music. They want to play, you know, Tchaikovsky and all that stuff that sounded so, you know, amazing. And then some of the Venezuelan classical repertoire that still sounded like, you know, the Debussy or Ravel, but with Venezuelan elements. But you know, it's interesting that my point is that you have to give kids both things. You know, they have to have the classical thing, and then and our music as well, like Latin music combined is inevitable. Like Latin music it's not going to have Western European music in it. It's all a mix. And you know, I find it useful to have a little bit of both, you know, have a piece that has both things, or have kids working on both classical and something really that really is mixed with other cultures.
And we have we have a string quartet with Eddie called Sweet Plantain, and we've played music by Aldemaro Romero, who's a great Venezuelan composer, Antonio Carlos Jobim, and stuff that Eddie has written, and who's the Brazilian, the guy that Encounters, the piece that was inspired.
Oh yeah, Hermeto Pascual.
Hermeto Pascual.
Hermeto Pascual, yeah. He's a very colorful composer from Brazil, and you know, we definitely mix all that stuff into the quartet, and we also have stuff from Paquito de Rivera from Cuba. So basically have Cuba, Brazil, Venezuela in most of our repertoire. And we try to, you know, to show all of this, you know, it's fun to play, but it's also useful to expose different backgrounds. And what else do we have? We have Piazzolla. We just did a piece by Astor Piazzolla from Argentina, which is very famous. But
and Paquito de Rivera, I think I mentioned.
Paquito de Rivera, yeah.
So, and we've done a lot of outreach. We've done collaborations with school orchestras. We have a lot of stuff that's works well, and we talk about imitating. We can get into that later, but imitating some of the Latin rhythms and the percussive instruments on a violin, viola, cello. You know, so I want to go back to Rachel, and thank you, Eddie. We're going to kind of keep going around, and so this is a good question for Rachel. I think in every era of music, composers of color have always existed and created work that in many cases stands up to what we call the great composers like Mozart, Beethoven, and Mahler. Why do you think the world knows so little about these composers compared to those that we've deified? And no disrespect to any of those composers. And what could we do to change that and celebrate their work?
Yeah, one of our hashtags is expand the canon. So we're not looking to replace the pieces that we already know and love, but we want to add to that body of repertoire with pieces that should have been part of the canon all along. And we're also talking, by the way, about women composers from every race and ethnicity, which have been also, you know, very under-recognized all of these years. Really, first of all, from a purely musical perspective, you know, the more good music we have in our life, the better. And we're all missing out by not having some of these great works to enjoy. But, you know, from obviously, as Daniel was talking about, you know, it's important that we celebrate our own cultural heritages and that we get to know each other's cultural heritages. It's interesting because in the realm of non-classical, there's often a concept of cultural appropriation, and when is it or isn't it okay to play a music that is not of your own heritage? And I don't feel qualified to get into that conversation, but in classical, it's really a responsibility and a joy to have cultural appreciation and to play all of the different great music that's been written by people from all over the world. Tchaikovsky would not want his violin concerto to only ever be played by Russians. That's not what it's about. And so, this is a way to get to know each other. This is the way to make the world a smaller place. And even serves, the purpose of, you think about and I'm, again, speaking more from a classical perspective, because that's more of my main activity, not to exceptionalize classical in any way. But you think about a little kid studying composers in the private teaching sector, and how, if their teacher does a good job of making sure they even know the name of the composer whose piece they're studying, that they then start to really revere these composers, and they become very elevated in their mind, the great masters, and you see their pictures, and you have this idea of what a composer looks like. Usually he's dead, he's European, he's white, and he's a he. And so to start to have this image as pertains to other composers, one of the interesting things we did when we were just about to publish our first curricular volume is we did a statistical survey of the dozen most commonly used string methods in both the school orchestra sector and the private teaching sector. So essential elements, Suzuki, Suspensels, and so on. And we discovered that it's mostly dead people, it's mostly European people, it's mostly men, and troublingly, occasionally there will be something that doesn't fit that, and it'll be, and it'll always be like from a traditional music perspective. Not that there's anything wrong with traditional music, but having only traditional music be what represents other cultures gives you the false impression that nobody from those cultures has written composed art music. So you have, Filipino tune, or it's a very colonialist mindset going on. And so, in fact, our first volume of Music by Black Composers is the most diverse pedagogical material for violin in existence, in terms of having men and women together, in terms of having 4 centuries of classical music, from the 1700s all the way to living composers from the 21st century, all mixed together, having composers from Africa, from Europe, from North America, from South America, and the Caribbean. And just the idea that there's this wide array of music, and that you have these role models that come from other peoples. And I think that's super important for kids as they're looking at the world. When the Black Lives Matter thing really exploded last spring, there was this question floating around, have you ever, or what age were you when you had your first teacher who happened to be Black? I was very blessed that my church children's choir director and my conductor of the Civic Orchestra of Chicago that I was in from age 11 onwards, the Chicago Symphony's training ensemble, they were both African American. And if I had been asked to give an adjective for an African American classical musician, I would have said, leaders, mentors, teachers, and used those words. Well, I didn't realize that was an abnormal experience for that time. And that's what we need to transition. So anyway, the point is, we need to make this sea change in classical music. And some people are starting to do it wholeheartedly. Some people are starting to do it performatively. Some people are still resisting it. Daniel's seeing all of these different things going on in our industry. But I think in terms of lasting change, for the next generation, if we start kids now having a different mix of music in their lives. I mean, it's really interesting for me to see my daughter's little group violin class. There are no Black children in her particular program's mix, just because of where they are geographically. But there are East Asian kids, there are Asian kids, there are Latino kids. There just happen not to be any Black kids in that particular clump of children, but they are working on music from different cultures, including Black composers and so on. And these kids are going to grow up. And if they become the audience members of the future, the arts donors of the future, and board members and administrators and performers, all the different pieces of our arts community, from the stage to the public, they're not going to accept a limited mix of music that's going to be far more narrow and uninteresting than the mix of music that they grew up with. And so if we get the right things going on right now with how we're educating our children, then regardless of what today's grown-ups do or don't do, and how far they are or aren't willing to go, hopefully by the time we see the next generation coming up, things will be vastly improved. And of course, I can't neglect to say that specifically, of course, making sure that there's music that reflects the experiences of the particular children is very, very important. Particularly, I mean, not only for other, my sister teaches a lot of, for example, East Asian children, and is always looking for, and Arabic descended children, and is always looking for music from different countries that she can give to her students, which I think is very commendable. But the African American community has a particular relationship to classical music that is even beyond that of other ethnic groups that are also underrepresented in our field, because they were specifically excluded, deliberately excluded from our field for so many years. And so it's not just a question of joining the mix, it's a question of overcoming this direct discrimination that existed for so long and arguably still exists to an overly large degree today. And so letting people know that this is part of their heritage, that classical musicians of African descent have existed, performers, composers, for all of these years, and it's not somebody else's music. I think this is that using the history to combat the circumstances of the present is particularly relevant.
And Rachel, you were talking about reaching into your own heritage and your own musical and cultural influences. And I wanted to direct a question to DBR. It's a perfect segue. Talk about how you got into composing and not just being a player, and how your Haitian heritage and your love of genres like hip hop influences your compositions. How do you utilize those elements?
Yeah, I started playing violin when I was 5 years old. I'm sure a few months later I was making things up. I had no idea what I was doing. I do remember being in 5th grade. I had this epiphany of I had this melody in my head. I had to go home and write it down. And I had been reading music. Mr. Miller, my first teacher, insisted upon reading notated music from day one. But it's different when you're trying to compose it. And I remember I made up my own key signature. And I figured it out. I just kind of figured it out. And, Mr. Miller looked at it, and that was pretty much it. I just started doing it. I didn't have any training, actually. I would just write things down, show it to my teacher. They would kind of correct it. I got to middle school, Miss Griffith. She was awesome. She noticed I was a little bored in class. So one day she asked me to conduct. And I remember she didn't start reading the paper or a book. She stood like right there and was engaged. I was conducting. And then she said, you don't seem like you're really into it. Why don't you bring something in for the group to play? It was a full orchestra. I said, okay. And I went home and just, I didn't have any book. I had no idea what I was doing other than I just dove in and I started figuring it out. Everything I wrote was kind of for the violin too. I was writing these very impossible to play flute parts, by the way. But we did it, and then a few years later, remember we had a school assembly? Remember those? Wow, it's hard to think about that. The gospel choir would sing, wow. The jazz band, yeah. I just remember everybody. They'd set us all up in the gym, right? You know what I'm talking about? But they even had a rock band, a local, somebody they were playing Hot for Teacher, believe it or not, or something like that. I don't know what it was. I mean, people went crazy. And then they would end with the orchestra in our polyester costume, outfits, playing whatever. And I just remember looking around, seeing teachers talking to one another, I remember a class left. I mean, it was such a humiliation on such a deep level. And I went to Miss Griffiths. I'm like, we gotta change that. And she challenged me. She said, well, why don't you come up with a program and write a song? And I got everybody together. I got my band together, and I figured out to do something for Students Against Drunk Driving. I think it was SAD or something like that, the acronym. So I wrote a song for that, had to sing. This was for the next assembly, and we went in there, and I remember we're going to go first. That was the other thing. But it was my first experience in a teacher having the foresight and the courage to encourage me and the whole group to approach this from a very democratic point of view. I didn't have the language then to understand what was going on. What she had done is and maybe you could put this in the chat, I do this now, replace the word rehearsal with something else. What word would you use? What happened all those years ago in 1980 Margate, Florida, was an orchestral jam. It was an orchestral assault. It was an orchestral democratic idea, but it wasn't a rehearsal. Words are important. So, I got into composing almost as a defiant act. And later, everything else, there you go, I love it. Ooh, an orchestra. I want to go to that. I want to go to an orchestral exploration. I'm telling you, imagination, innovation, it's a hairline fracture. It's a hairline fracture from tradition. Tradition is nothing but an old innovation waiting patiently to be made new again. And that's what happened in that classroom, and I carry that with me when I compose. Now, the hip hop and all that stuff came later, using drum kits, using instruments. A lot of it it was me feeling like my voice wasn't going to be heard. First day at Vanderbilt University, my first composition lesson, I said, hey, I want to write a piece for harp and drum kit. And I remember being shot down. You can't do that. Can you imagine? You can't do that. And it was a series of me having, and a lot of other composers, having to challenge and continuing to challenge the status quo, continuing to challenge the notion of. I would encourage all of us to redefine excellence, to redefine even the notion of composition. And I'll leave it this way, Joe. I'm a father now. A lot of us are parents here. I think all of us on this panel are, actually. Eddie, I don't know. I'm assuming you are. Are you a father?
Yeah.
You are. Okay. Yes. You just had
yeah.
that paternal thing going, right? Yes, of course. A lot of things I do compositionally now, I think to myself, in a Cajun idea, I think to myself, what would I want my biracial son to hear? So here's a quick example. And this is what I've never heard. So here's composition. When I say the forming and framing of ideas, Joe, here's one in this moment. I would love to stand in front of the New York Philharmonic. I would love for them to have Beethoven's Fifth Symphony First Movement in front of them. I would say three things. The part in front of you, play it as slowly and softly as you can. Find one measure that you play as loudly as you can. And the piece is over when you determine it's over. Go. I have no idea what that would sound like. And the fact of the matter is, we will probably never know what it sounds like because there is a lack of courage in our industry. And for me, composing, the titles tell you so much about me. Harlem Essay for Orchestra, Hip Hop Essay, America, Never Beautiful, Voodoo Violin Concerto, Hip Hop Dances and Prayers for Rachel Barton Pine. And
which we're gonna play actually.
Oh, cool. So I'll just leave it there. I think that for me, democracy, I always say the stage may be the last bastion of democracy where all voices can and should be heard. You could probably say the same thing about the score. You could probably say the same things about the books you are choosing to teach from, right? Yeah, I'll leave it there.
So thanks, man. And later, maybe if we have time, I want to get into how do you incorporate a DJ into an orchestra. I had specific questions like that.
Easily.
Using samples, things like that. So I want to talk to Eddie, who's another composer. And let me change the spotlight here. So you write a lot of music inspired by your Venezuelan heritage. You've also written. We have a piece called Danzón Pa' Ti, which is the Cuban inspired piece. And then, we could play the Venezuelan and Zweig if you want. What are some of the ways you take the Latin rhythms that you've learned over the years and translate them to strings? If you're comfortable demonstrating that on your violin, you can, or just talk about them, or we can, I don't want to put you on the spot, but.
No, that's fine. That's fine. There in different pieces, this way of using the instrument as a percussive instrument, most of the time is for because he needs it. so like, for example, in a Cuban piece, you could play without making any percussive instruments, percussion instruments, noises with the instrument. It still works, but it's not as cool. And curiosity slash, almost I want to make people dance kind of thing makes me want to explore it. For example, like if you do a piece that's so you're doing the violin part of a charanga band, and then you're also taking care of the güiro and so I incorporated that kind of thing in some of our pieces. On the Venezuela side of things, there's an instrument called cuatro, which is basically a Venezuelan ukulele. Like that a 6/8 tone, 1 2 3 So that it's something they do with their hands. They do like so they make that sound when they block the strings, like sometimes guitars do, and then they roll the instrument, their fingers. So the cuatro, or Venezuelan ukulele, becomes a percussion harmony instrument. So that's kind of what I do in some of our pieces. And then in Venezuelan Zweig, it's a piece that I wrote while we were in Sweden. And so I try to, while we were in the band, going from town to town to play concerts, I wanted to dedicate a piece of music to the Swedish people. And so I wrote this thing real quick where I put together some of my stuff, some of their stuff, and some of their old fiddle stuff. So that piece, and then ends with a Cuban thing. And that's a piece I actually published. That's available, and I made it into an orchestra, a string orchestra thing for schools, because it's pretty accessible and it has the possibility of playing with those effects or without the effects.
I want to put the link in the chat where people can get that piece.
Yeah, and I'm going to add some of the. I'm actually fixing. I realized the parts need a little more information, but the score is there. You could purchase the score, and I could, if you reach out to me, I could give you the parts, but I'm also going to put it as part of the purchase. This is the thing of this weekend I was going to do.
So we can start playing some music now, and maybe we could start with this piece since you're talking about it. There is, you sent me a link, Eddie, but I found this thing we did on the radio show, which I thought the sound quality was better. So if you don't mind,
the Reading thing, right?
Yeah, from our residency.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't use that one because it has other pieces, but we start with that one, so it's perfect. Yeah.
Cool. So this is the piece by Eddie Venegas called A Venezuelan in Zweig. Zweig was, well, you want to talk a little bit more about it, you can introduce it.
Yeah, Zweig was this little town. We got there very...
this was in Sweden. We were touring all over Sweden.
We were touring and there was nothing. It was just a forest, and it was snowing a little bit. It was super quiet, and it was very scary. So and then they went into the band, and they realized everybody already went into the building where we were gonna play, and just by myself there looking around. There was nothing, and I got a little scared. And then that's the idea that I got for the title. But the piece has a few things, including some pop, very famous pop singer song in Sweden, so people recognize it. And it's like a light, semi-serious, fun piece that I put together very quickly, but it works really well.
Okay, so here it is, Venezuelan in Zweig. Can everyone see that? Sorry. Okay.
Pure created a clear filter
Sorry.
to show what gets removed from water in only 30 minutes.
That's my favorite part of the piece. All right. Eddie, I love how you worked that water filter thing into the piece. So,
My old teacher, Henry Kowalski, had really great advice about messing.
wait a minute. Was that me? Oh, okay.
I think that's
Sorry.
the
I thought I
Yeah.
paused it. All right. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to go back to Rachel. Thank you, Eddie. To go back to Rachel and have her give a guided tour of musicbyblackcomposers.com and talk more about the creation of that website and the foundation. So take it away, Rachel.
Okay. Give me half a sec to open the
Yeah.
correct tab.
He's going to share her
I've
screen.
Got it ready to screen share. And then I will also open PDF of our book. Let's see. Sorry, I should have thought of opening these in advance, but I'm just about there. Okay. Yeah, so I'll start with the book and screen share. There's our book without its cover.
Yeah.
All right, can everybody see that? It's working?
All
right.
No. I just see blackness. There we go.
Oh, you might have to. Oh, of course, at this very moment.
I see the list now.
Okay. Yeah. Funky. Right at that moment. Oh, now it's doing it again. Am I?
We could come back to you if you want.
Did we lose her?
I don't know.
Oh, there she is.
Okay.
Zoom is doing strange things.
You see, anyway, here's on screen a little bit if you can see it, but
Okay. So
Great.
am I with you again?
We hear you. Let me spotlight you.
Okay.
Or actually, yeah, share screen. Okay.
Okay, we'll just pray that I stay on here. Okay, there's our composer collage. We've got Coleridge Taylor, Bologna, Chevalier de Saint Georges, Nketiah, Florence Price, Cordero, and Jesse Montgomery. And these 6 composers represent 4 centuries, 5 geographic regions, and 2 genders. So it just shows you the diversity of what exists. There's our team, our advisors.
I don't think we're seeing what you think we want to see.
I was just about to say those words.
Goodness, it says I am screen sharing. I will stop the share and go back to the share and try this once again. Now are you seeing it?
No, we see a list from your computer, not the image of what you want us to see.
When you share a screen, it gives you a choice of windows, and you have to choose one.
I did. I have my PDF pulled up. Do you not see some sheet music on here?
I see the list of folders and PDFs, but I don't see the actual individual PDF if you were opening up a page.
Oh, did that help?
Share your screen again, because right now we're seeing everybody.
Goodness gracious. Okay.
Isn't it fun?
Technology. Gotta love it. Okay. So, one more time.
Okay.
Got it?
Yes.
Whew. Okay.
Bingo.
Anyway,
Okay.
this is, wrong direction. This is the composer collage I mentioned. There they are. And, okay, so this is what we do for each composer. We have a visual image of them, which might be a photo if they are a recent composer, might be a painting if they are a long dead composer. And this was actually an unexpectedly onerous task among many, and why it took so long to get the book to print, because we were very committed for representation to have an image of each composer and not just a name. But, you know, if you're talking about copyright, obviously, you know, we want it to be absolutely kosher. It's been interesting to discover that not every academic publication is absolutely kosher, and I can understand why. But, you know, a composer, a photograph from 100 years ago, you know, now we're like running back and forth to the Library of Congress a million times trying to track down the descendants of the obscure photographer of the obscure composer. And even you know, paintings from the 1700s, you got to track down which facility it lives in and get, you know, legal paperwork from those guys. So even though it's not in copyright per se, there's also all kinds of stuff. So yeah, that was a big pain. But anyway, we have violin 2 parts. That was initially just inspired by the fact that, you know, I don't play keyboard and wanted to accompany my daughter, but it actually works great for teachers to play with students, especially there are a number of programs that exist in locations where there is no keyboard instrument in the teaching space. Or, you know, the teacher doesn't play piano and you'd have to pay a pianist to come and play it. And of course, for group violin class and things, it's nice to have these second violin parts. We also we partnered with elementary educators to make sure that we define possibly unfamiliar terms. In this page, we have the word abolish, so that kids know what that's talking about. And then we have feature articles with some of the topics that I mentioned earlier. And role model profiles. Well, the reference recordings were done by some wonderful Sphinx young artists, and role model profiles. So a lot of times you can still go to a community and maybe not a single teacher at the community music school, the Suzuki program, the public school, not a single teacher is Black. You go to that town's orchestra, not a single player is Black. And so a kid grows up not truly seeing a future for themselves. And of course, organizations like Sphinx have been doing so much great work in this area, but we've decided in the pages of the book to also provide helpful examples of, you know, if you grew up playing violin, what could you go on to do? So not just, you know, the most fancy areas of our profession, like a soloist, string quartet, first violinist, or whatever, but also, you know, someone who plays in the pit for Broadway orchestras. Pardon?
I didn't bring it.
Oh, somebody's unmuted.
Can everyone mute themselves, please? Unless, well, except
Okay.
like,
So, yeah, so Lucinda, for example, is a wonderful violinist who started her own Suzuki school, and you can see her with her dad as a child. You can see her with some of her students. Over here, you can see her with her daughters who've gone on to great things themselves. And so we're going to have youth orchestra conductor, music administrator, you know, music writer, you know, someone who works as primarily concertmaster, you know, just showing all the different professions you can go into. Yeah, so that's the books, and our idea was to have this be a supplemental curriculum for beginners through advanced levels. There's Ty Murray, who is a soloist, yeah, there's our timeline poster. You can see this is 300 composers from around the world, and our coloring book, which was also inspired by parenthood. We made a coloring book of 40 composers. 10 of the 40 are women, which was not by design. We just chose who had, you know, the biographies that seemed the most relevant. I wouldn't say it's the 40 best, because of course you have to leave out somebody, but it's 40 of the best, the most important, according to my curators. I did not have the bravery to make that determination myself, but we had a panel of our amazing advisors. And yeah, and so not half would have been great to have half women, but of course the farther back in history, the fewer opportunities there were. But 10% is better than any other coloring book out there. And okay, now I'm going to screen share our website real quick and just show you what we have. So first of all, I want to draw your attention to our projects timeline. This shows all the things we've done thus far with links to them, all the things that we're planning to do. Now, sometimes the order can get shuffled based on what volunteers we have with what qualifications. For example, the lists of professional repertoire for viola are about to launch before those for cello, because we had a wonderful viola team that got it done. Carillon pedagogical volume is about to be published. You'd say, what's a carillon and why did you prioritize that? Well, a carillonneur, as they're called, did the work. Carillon, I didn't know what that instrument was. It's a keyboard instrument that operates church bells, and you can get a college degree in it all over the world, and real humans are employed to play the bells of churches.
When I was
So
a student, I went to IU, Indiana University, and they had a carillon department. And those
Okay.
guys were practicing all everywhere we went through the campus. You hear the sound of the carillon because those guys were practicing all day. And
That's awesome. Well, I just love the idea that, in the very near future, after our book is about to be published, and the works of Black composers are now going to ring out into the neighborhood from these church bells all over the planet. That's just such a beautiful thought. Anyways, so obviously we can't do everything at once, so we have to prioritize some things over others, but this is the order if we ourselves were to do it. But thanks to different teams of volunteers, it's entirely possible that this might get shuffled. And actually, at this very moment, we are working closely with the American Recorder Society for recorder materials, with the American Guild of Organists. We have a piano team going, woodwind. We don't yet have brass. We have school band, school orchestra, which I'll specifically tell you about in a minute, symphony orchestra. We have viola pedagogy, viola professional rep, cello, which is sort of at the moment both, bass. I'm continuing to take the lead on violin because that's obviously what I play. And am I forgetting anything? Oh, yes, of course. We just started with a new volunteer for string trio, and our string quartet is pretty far along. All of chamber music is obviously on our wish list, but won't probably happen for a while. But yeah, that's already a lot. Okay, so that's just if you see, well, when are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? Well, that gives you your answer. And then we have, listing our team, our repertoire specialists, and so on. Okay, so then
we were talking yesterday. I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a shortage of orchestral repertoire because let's say if you have a string orchestra in your school and you want music by Black composers. So we were talking about the possibility of expanding arrangements that might be for chamber music or solo or duo violin.
Yeah, exactly. So this is I'll tell you a few things about. Let me quickly finish because then I'll go off of screen share. Okay, so for our violin volume, this is the only pedagogical volume we have thus far, but we're about to publish others. This is obviously for more of the private teaching or group violin sectors or group violin class. And we have various free resources that affiliate with the book that you might use in other general music education classrooms. For example, for each of our feature articles and role model profiles, we have links to those people and topics. And we keep the links on our website so that they are always accurate and up to date. And you can obviously click on these pages even if you've never bought the book and learn about these topics and people. Presentation materials we have limited to those composers that appear in our books, but there's a heck of a lot of composers, and you might use these for, and we have bios of them that are different from our paragraph bios in the books. They're bullet point bios meant for reading aloud, and then if you click on each of these slides, it's a PowerPoint slide that has the composer, a map of the world, like Saint-Georges here. You can see he was born in the Caribbean, made his career in France, so we've got both of these areas with the little stars on the map of the world, his image, his dates, and his name. So those are some of the resources that you can avail yourself of. We've got these repertoire directories, which have, and one thing we haven't yet done is a skill level field. I'll talk about that in a sec, but this does give you all of, these are kind of example, and we have a lot more that are just about ready to launch, but more of a chamber music type page, this unaccompanied solo violin, and more of a large ensemble type page, this violin and orchestra one, where we give you information. We give you a link to a free recording if such exists on YouTube, Spotify, or SoundCloud. We give you a link to where to buy the music. We tell you if it's in manuscript and difficult to read. We're working on that front as well with various volunteer engravers. And of course, we give you the composer's birth dates, geographic affiliations, and so on, so that you have, because there are always three barriers. What music exists? Where do I find it? And is it in playable condition? And so we're giving you data and trying to address all of that. We have other resources that I'll just very quickly walk through. Our coloring book. Here's an example of the Florence Price page where you can see her bio. And a lot of people use this book not for a coloring book, but just as an introduction to 40 of the most important Black composers, which is a great book to read, actually. And the images are fanciful enough for kids and and detailed enough for grown-ups, which I love. We've got our timeline poster, which makes a great, just, general education classroom image, just to show the depth and breadth that it wasn't, where did the image go? Oh no, that's the wrong page. Yeah, so it wasn't just a few rare individuals, but it was all these composers for all these centuries, and it just tells you that there is this wealth of, this real treasure trove. Okay, Living Composers Directory, we are now up to about 300 composers, and I'm sure there are still more to add. Our youngest is a teenage girl, kind of the Amanda Gorman of composers, this 14-year-old who's really a go-getter, has so much to say, into, all the way to veterans in their, 80s, 90s. We have, you can sort. Unfortunately, we haven't yet had the funds or the volunteer, the qualified volunteer to make a true database with drop-down lists where you can have searchable fields, but the table gets you pretty far. You can sort by birth year, you can sort by gender, you can sort by geographic region. Of course, some composers have multiple regions. You can hunt around. Each composer has a website if they have one, and also contact information, so that you can email them. And I'm hoping this can serve two purposes. One, you can see what already exists, but two, you can get to know a composer's voice and then consider them for commission. One of the ideas that arose out of thinking about today's conference is that specifically for school orchestra, not every composer would want to write for a specifically pedagogical work, or would necessarily feel comfortable or qualified doing so, because it is a very specific type of effort. So we have started a listserv with all of these 300 composers, as many of them as we have emails for. And one idea I had was to put out a call for who might want to be included on a special list of people who were available for potential pedagogical commissions. So, writing new works for school orchestra. Of course, we do intend to have a sheet music directory of existing works, and we are already working towards that. There's a wonderful website called Institute for Composer Diversity, and we've been partnering with them from the get-go. We've been around for a lot longer than them, and gave them all of our Black composer information to incorporate to their website. They're all about all of diversity. So anybody who's LGBTQ, regardless of race, anybody who's a woman, regardless of race, anybody who's a person of color, of any ethnicity. The problem is trying to be all of diversity. Sometimes if you're looking for a specific thing, it becomes a bit harder. So that if you go, for example, to their page for school band, it tells you all the diverse composers and all of their works for school band, but you don't know which ones are Black. You'd have to literally look up each composer one by one on their big database. It's a big, huge pain. So instead, we are in the process of excerpting that specifically for our Black composers website, doing the work for you.
Rachel, somebody asked, I don't know if you saw the question, is the repertoire identical, transposed, or transcribed for each instrument, quartet/trio? Meaning, do you have a repertoire that has versions, as I interpret that, like that has versions for solo and trio and quartet?
Okay, yeah, I'll talk about it in half a sec. Just to wrap up our brief tour here, and I won't go on and on. We have our Dead Composers Directory, Historic Composers Directory, excuse me. There are about 150 of those. We don't have links. We figure you can Google them because they're dead. They don't have their own websites. And then we have our digital resources, which I already told you about. We have this wonderful children's book page, which is anything about, and we've limited to classical music, not to make the statement that classical is superior, but because classical has been the one genre which has traditionally not been seen as a Black genre. And so to combat that perception, we focus on classical. And so there's, our books about classical music that happen to have illustrations of children of color, or books about specific performers, composers, even a book like this little one that has illustrations of smiling violins, but the author herself is African American. And that's, you can see it goes on and on. There's actually quite a few books. We're always adding to it. We have a big bibliography on the topic, which is books for grown-ups. Some of them are listed in multiple different categories. Discography, a lot of these things, of course, you can find on Spotify and things to play different works. This is really fun, the podcast list. I highly recommend that. We now have, starting to have music theory. Right now it's more articles and YouTube video discussions on the topic, but we're hoping that ultimately this will end up being a kind of aggregator of resources so that, I mean, I'm looking at my 9-year-old's, music theory book, and all of the examples are always by dead white male European composers. And so starting to have even those little examples of find the triplet or whatever it is, and starting to have those examples from diverse composers is going to be so important. And then this blog, our most recent blog, is kind of fun. It tells you everything it takes to create a volume. So when people say, why can't you just, take your violin book and make it into a viola book? Well, you can't just do that because of all these things. Okay, and then there's how you can volunteer. All right, I'm going to stop the screen share and talk to you briefly about plans for school orchestra. So, few things. Actually, the Suzuki Association of the Americas has already taken a few of the works from our Violin Volume 1 that are in the public domain. You always have to think about whether it's in the public domain. If you're not, we do have, we're like the one pedagogical book with academic source notes in the back pages. So it does tell you all the details. But if you have any question about whether it's in the public domain, just email us. Our email's on the website. But anything in the public domain, obviously you can do anything you want with it. And so they've taken some of those and made them into, school teaching, string, or, violin, viola, cello, whatever, kind of arrangements. And I think you probably have to belong to SAA to get those. They're through their program, Suzuki in the Schools. I know a lot of other teachers have done similar things individually. We're considering just having kind of an open source approach and having teachers who've taken these things and done things with them just link, send us links, and we'll link on our page, and other teachers can get them, and it just becomes kind of a sharing thing as opposed to us publishing any kind of official versions. So obviously any of our pedagogical books, our next volume for violin, which is about to come out, our volumes for other instruments, any of that stuff is, ripe for such treatment. If you yourself are not comfortable doing your own arrangements, hopefully you can draw upon those of others. But then there is music that has been written specifically for school orchestra. I want to draw your attention to one particular composer who's very, very prolific, David Robinson, and you can find him, of course, in our Living Composers Directory. He's written a ton of music for school orchestra at various levels. He was a school orchestra director for decades and decades. Yeah, really great guy. There's probably more stuff than we're aware of, and our volunteers are starting to go through all the different composers' websites because, the number of composers on our site has just exploded. So we need to go back and go through every one of their websites and see what they've written and make sure we haven't not found anything. And then, as I said, I also want to put out a call for who would be interested in potential commissions. The other way to create school orchestra repertoire, of course, is transcriptions, not just of solo repertoire, but of existing ensemble repertoire. And as we are working on our string quartet repertoire, we're going to need to partner with experts, of which I am not one, because I didn't grow up in the school orchestra system. It was, Suzuki and then the elite, pre-college conservatory training. So somebody who would be able to look at a string quartet movement and say, yes, this would make a good school string orchestra arrangement. And to go through, and I'm talking about piles and piles of music, but I'm sure there's lots of good stuff that could potentially be transformed. And so as we're working with the string quartet repertoire, that would be one of the steps with it. Also, symphonic repertoire, I'm sure some of that would also be transcribable and maybe also exist for youth orchestra in its current form. We need an expert to be able to put a skill level diagnosis on it. That one's asked a grade 5, that one's asked a grade 6. So we need some guidance from some of people like you about how to make those designations and then actually getting them made, because there are pieces, by William Grant Still and others that are actually intermediate enough that younger people could play them, but we don't know, but they weren't specifically written for school orchestra at the time that they were written, and we don't know what to call them, so to speak. So that's some work that we need to do. We need to find the right partners who are experts in the school orchestra field who can help us with our symphonic music diagnoses, our string quartet diagnoses, help us codify the way that we want to make these designations. So if any of you want to volunteer, please send us a quick email. The email address is on our musicbyblackcomposers.org website. The last thing I'll say is advocacy. So first of all, a lot of state systems do have solo little competition categories with their all-state whatever events. So it's important to get those lists diversified because they'll often be extensive yet limited, and you can only play something from the list, and it doesn't include anything diverse, and that's a big, huge problem in our world. So really advocating for, and that will go back to the solo repertoire, and I am planning to add skill level designations to the solo repertoire as well, particularly like violin and piano, which is going to launch soon. But then also just advocacy within your school system, within your state system, making sure that some of these works, once we have good lists, are listed on the state lists. And that's going to be, super, super important in terms of getting a lot of this music out there. So I really welcome your ideas, your suggestions, your volunteer hours, hopefully, if you are qualified and have a bit of time to help us. And as much dialogue as possible, because the only way we can get any of this done is as a community.
Rachel, thank you so much. And I'm going to come back to you because I want to feature music by each panelist. And I want to reiterate what Rachel said. If you or anyone you know is interested in volunteering to help with her website, please spread the word and sign up and reach out. And the other thing, if you're interested in writing arrangements, if you purchase something from music by blackcomposers.org, growing up, I knew a lot of teachers who liked to write their own arrangements and put together concerts. If that's not something you have the time or to do or are comfortable with, the idea of maybe creating a fundraiser with your school orchestra to commission a composer or an arranger to do work for you, it could be another way to go. So I want to go to DBR, and I want to ask you a question and have you feature something you composed and played on. But I also want to say, in the interest of time, if anyone has a question, don't hesitate, just write it into the chat and we'll try to get to it in the remaining 5 minutes. All right, DBR.
Hey, yeah. There was a question asked to me.
Question. Sorry, I had a question for you. I forgot to ask you the question.
Oh, okay.
So how do you incorporate elements of hip hop and working with DJs in orchestras?
Well, I actually put that in the chat. So I think, and there was also a question related to this about how do I teach these things if I can't embody them or play them myself?
Right.
Okay, so
Good one.
I would say get everyone in the room, and this is a good time to do it. You don't have to approach. The reason that we use contributor is that I don't feel like I have all the answers. So I think start to think about how you teach and how you learn. So if you don't know a DJ, or you don't know a saxophone player, or you don't know a dancer, spoken word artist, there's so many ways to find out, who is in your town, who do your students know, who do your peers know, networking. It's as simple as that. And, oftentimes we have to remind ourselves that everything we need is right in front of us. So start there. If you want to, specific to the one question I was asked, if you don't feel confident teaching a technique, but wanting to share a technique, you almost have to approach it from a choreographic point of view. The best choreography isn't necessarily something that the choreographer can dance, right? So you participate in this world of ideas. You have a different role or function. Your student really wants to play hip hop music. Your student wants to jam. Your student wants to bring it. I'm changing my dialect to change what I'm talking about. Your student wants to approach their instrument as, it's not, I always say, it's not the violin, it's my violin. There's a difference. So start there. And by the way, everything is online. This is our Library of Alexandria. If something is wrong with your particular sink, somebody has taken the time to not just talk about it online, but to make a video showing you how to fix that particular sink. There are so many videos out there about everything, If you Google search hip hop, I'm 50 years old, as I said. 30 years ago, there's nothing. Now, if you Google search hip hop violin, thousands of videos come up. Christian Holmes, Black Violin, Kev Market, you name it. Right? And it's not just talking or playing, it's dissection. I'll just show you a couple things real quick. I wanted my violin to breathe. Everybody should breathe. Breathe in. Breathe out. So I would start to make connections right there. One of the things I would say if I've had somebody in, a contributor in front of me is, what's the role and responsibility of being alive, right? During the course of this wonderful 2-hour conversation, many people have died. Many people have taken their last breath. What is the role and responsibility of us being alive? So important. And if you're resisting right now, breathe in, float the tongue as you exhale, meaning your tongue doesn't touch any other part of your mouth. That simple act of breathing and resistance to wanting to breathe with me. Breathe with me, right? Breathe in. Especially in a time of this pandemic, it's so important. I wanted my violin to breathe. I call that light string playing. As I think about that, I think about the different ways I want to approach vibrato. So I one of the things I'm wanting to do is to start to think about how violin is a string instrument. It can also be a percussive instrument. It can also be what I call a woodwind instrument. It can breathe, it can scream, it can shout, it can take on different roles. So when it comes to hip hop music, one of the things that, and I shouldn't just relegate it to hip hop music, I talk a lot about how my race, my culture, my ethnicity informs how I play. Right? So for me, and then I might have to switch, yeah? Get it. I don't know if you can hear that, but so I'm wanting my instrument to sound not like an acoustic instrument. When I think about a DJ, I'm always trying to think about sounds in the world infecting, interesting use of that word, how I play the instrument. So I worked a lot with DJs, and why I say get everyone in the room is get everyone in the room and let them have conversations with one another. I guarantee you, there is a young person, oftentimes the violinist in your room has a whole producer's practice. They've got GarageBand, Logic, they are doing things on their own, and they haven't been invited in. So when I was about, 15, no, it's a little older, 17 years old, I started working with Two Live Crew. And this is when you actually had records, and I would watch what they do, and I wanted my violin to sound that way. So, and there's a technique to it. Low, 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 middle, low, high, middle, 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 low, middle, 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 high, low, high, middle, high, high. So there's all different ways to approach the violin as not as a violin, but as a different instrument. And this is even amplified more when you apply it to electronics. But let me just share some things with you, because I also think it's important that you know that this can end up in the score. So hoping you can see this, I thought I would switch it up a little bit, Joe, and just play a minute or so of Clap Your Hands. It's a string quartet for Rosa Parks. All my string quartets are named after civil rights icons. The first one was X for Malcolm X. The second one was second one was King for Martin Luther King Jr. Third one was Powell for Adam Clayton Powell. Fourth one, Angelou for Maya Angelou. She knew those three men, and we don't talk enough about Black women and their role, and their vital role in our civil rights and continuing role in our worldwide civil rights. The fifth one is Parks. Yes, string quartet number 5, Rosa Parks. And it's funny, this piece is what? I can't do the math. 16 years old. Okay, but this is a wonder. I just thought I'd play a little bit for you because I remember being on a panel with Philip Glass and I can't remember who it was. There was a few other very distinguished composers. And when they got to me, the first question was, do you write your music down? And again, I didn't have the language to ask them, why are you asking me that question? That's interesting. Why do you feel that my music might not be written down? I mean, the implication in the question has always kind of stayed with me. And I think it's important that the brilliant work that we just witnessed coming from Rachel Barton Pine, and not the excruciatingly severe documentation and exchange of the work is so important. So, so much of what I just did is written down. Other composers, other violinists are doing it. And I think that it's important to know that so much of this can end up in the hands of your students that you don't have to embody these techniques. You can be the interlocutor. You can be the means of distribution for them. So I thought I'd just play a little bit of this string quartet. And what's so great about, I think, so much of this work is that it connects, just like a lot of classical music in the canon, to history. It connects to major pivotal social changes in our country and in our culture. Rosa Parks was on that bus in that town on that day. And when she was asked to move, she replied she thought first and foremost of her father, working long hours, the humiliation of being seen only by one's race. And she thought of how her father would find peace in the Baptist church, clapping his hands, stomping his feet, and finding communion there. So here's the second movement of the string quartet called Clap Your Hands. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to watch the performance by this wonderful string quartet. And I forgot their name, but we'll find it out. So sorry. It's not 45th Parallel Universe. So we should know their name. I'll find out in a second. Wait, let me see if it's right there.
Is it Musai Remix?
Yes, that's it. Yes. Musai Remix. Woo! Okay. Dope. But let's just listen to a minute or two, because as I kind of don't. Well, what's interesting to me is how many string quartets incorporate hand clapping and foot stomping, and of course, what I love is that there's also a string quartet version of this piece done, and audience is important. When I was a child, going to a classical music concert meant you didn't participate, you listened. You didn't clap your hands. You didn't stomp your feet. Imagine going to a basketball game with the rules of a orchestra concert imposed. Or to flip it around, imagine going to a classical music concert with the rules of a basketball game allowed, right? So let's check out a little bit of this, just a minute or so. I'm assuming you can see the score over here. There's the film right here. Funky viola right there, yo. All right. So cool. That's a little bit of that. And, sheet music is available if you want it. But more to the point, the audience is clapping along. If you just look at this quartet, if you just look at them, as the great Bill T. Jones, Arnie's dancer choreographer, who I was his music director for 10 years, would say, the best performances begin with the performers on the stage and they don't have to do a damn thing. So I think there's important information in these notes, in this practice, in the approach. I can show one. I can't tell you how many times how far do I want to go with this? Let me be cool. Let me be cool in this moment. Let me just say that hand clapping is not easy. Hand clapping is not easy to do in concert with this particular boom, dun 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 dun, where the silence is so important. I can't tell you how many times I've had to speak to the cellist and have this conversation about how silence in the pocket is so important on a micro level, but on a macro level. That letting this note ring into this measure actually causes a muddying of the sound, right? So there are so many techniques embedded in black music on an instrument that is so wondrous to explore. Quickly, I'd love to share a little bit of an overt political statement that involves electronic violin playing. I have a lot of instruments that I commission. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick. So we have 9 minutes.
Okay.
I definitely want them to see a sample of this, but I don't think I also wanted to get to a sample of one of Rachel's performances. We haven't seen any.
Of course. So let me do 30 seconds of Requiem. Yeah.
Great.
So this is a piece that I wrote during the Black Lives Matter movement. It was working with a videographer. It was actually a live stream. It's for 6-string violin, a filmmaker, and an online audience. And it's called Requiem for the Living in Color. We'll do 30 seconds of this. It's in 4 movements. This is the second movement called Verses. Okay. Okay, Joe, sorry.
Yeah.
And that's it.
That was amazing. So, and I love the electric violin. I'm an electric violinist myself, and I love those kinds of sounds. I love the fuzz, the distortion, and that just was such a gut-wrenching piece of music. So emotional and spoke.
Yeah, and Joe, very, very easy to do. Well, let's keep going. If there's time at the end, I can show just 30 seconds of that. But let's keep the love going.
Rachel, you had a piece you wanted to share, and I wanted to use the remaining time to at least let people hear you.
Yeah, and I also want to just mention, I mean, what DBR is doing is obviously so incredibly cutting edge and innovative and effective. Just gets us in the gut. And throughout history, certainly composers of African descent have drawn upon other kinds of what you might call non-classical Black musics of their time and place. In America, obviously, going back in time before hip-hop with jazz, with blues and spirituals, around the world, African musical languages with rhythms and melodies. And of course, in Latin America, those kinds of rhythms and melodies, which of course often are came from Africa in the first place, but mixing with the indigenous styles. But there's also quite a lot of classical music by Black composers that doesn't sound like, you wouldn't know they were Black by listening to it. They might sound like the Romantic period. They might sound like the Classical period. They might sound like atonal contemporary music. And the one word that I use to describe music by Black composers is diverse. There's just a million different great voices. But anyways, here's a piece. This is, I think, super cool among Daniel's output because unlike a lot of solo violin repertoire, violin and orchestra, violin and accompaniment, whatever, he didn't write this for himself. He wrote it for me. And so it's really cool that to see his violin language translated into writing something for someone else. I'll let him maybe talk about that more. But I'm going to do a very shortened version of his Hip Hop Dance #1. If you want to see the full thing, just Google Rachel Barton Pine and hip hop, and it's what will pop up on YouTube. But this is a shortened version just so you get a taste.
Wow. So the great Rachel Barton Pine, the great Daniel Bernard Roumain, the great Eddie Venegas. We're out of time. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you all of you who attended. Hope you got some valuable information out of this. And please follow up with any of us, with any of the panelists, with any questions. We wish you a wonderful weekend and a wonderful remaining school year.
And
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe.
Go.
Thanks for having us, and good luck to all of you. I hope you'll stay in touch and we can all be part of this effort to change our world.
And I
thank
want
you to the panelists, and just look at our website for any upcoming events that we might have. And I'd love to have some of you back. And thank you from Asta, New Jersey.
And I want to say one more thing. I encourage all of you to attend the virtual national conference in March, the ASTA National Conference. I'm doing a presentation, and there's a bunch of other wonderful people doing presentations. So we hope you can attend. So thanks again, and thanks to Brian and Jody.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much.
Everyone.